For more than 50 years, Camilla has walked in the shadow of a love affair condemned by the entire world. From being labeled the third person in the most controversial marriage in the history of the British royal family, she gradually moved toward the center of power and ultimately placed on her head a crown that many believed should never have belonged to her. To her supporters, Camilla is the woman who patiently waited for the love of her life. But to millions of others, she remains a symbol of betrayal, a name forever linked to the tears of Princess Diana and the collapse of a family once admired by the entire world. For many years, Buckingham Palace spent millions of pounds on a quiet but carefully calculated campaign to reshape Camilla's public image. Step by step, she was introduced as a devoted wife, a calm woman standing behind King Charles. But no matter how hard the royal machine tried, the past never disappeared. And now, as the year 2026 begins with a wave of instability, many believe Camilla's era of safety is slowly coming to an end. King Charles, the greatest shield protecting her for decades, is reportedly growing weaker. Meanwhile, new public opinion polls continue to send alarming signals as the number of people turning against Camilla keeps rising. The most frightening part is not the public criticism. It is the growing sense that an entire nation's patience is running out. Is Camilla truly the victim of a love story that happened at the wrong time? Or was she someone who carefully calculated every step to claim the most powerful position in the British royal family? Today, we will break down 15 signs that make many people believe karma has finally caught up with her at the very peak of power. In January 2026, a new survey from YouGov quietly created an earthquake inside Buckingham Palace. There were no screams, no emergency press conference. No member of the royal family stepped forward to deny the situation. But behind closed doors, many media advisors understood they had just received the most terrifying report in years. Only 42% of British citizens said they viewed Camilla positively in her role as queen. That number was not only lower than royal expectations, it shattered the entire narrative they had spent more than 2 decades trying to build. They believed time would make the public forget the past. They believed that if Camilla appeared long enough with an image of calmness, privacy, and devotion, the public would eventually accept her as a natural part of the monarchy. But this survey revealed a brutal truth. Acceptance has never meant love. What made these results even more alarming was the younger generation. Nearly 50% of Gen Z participants in the survey openly described Camilla as the villain in a real-life documentary about Diana's tragedy. This is what truly terrified royal media strategists. They had placed their bets on generational distance. They believed people born after Diana's death would no longer carry strong emotions about the broken marriage between Diana and Charles. But social media destroyed that entire calculation. On TikTok, YouTube, and royal discussion forums, Diana's old interviews continue to be shared again and again. Images of her crying in front of cameras, her stories about loneliness inside the palace, and especially her famous statement about there being 3 people in that marriage continue to haunt the public. For younger generations, this is not distant history. It feels like a television drama that never ended. And in that story, Camilla is always cast as the villain. For many years, the public could tolerate Camilla's presence as long as she remained behind Charles. When she was still the Duchess of Cornwall, and later Queen Consort, many people chose to ignore her. They did not love her. But they also did not want to reopen old wounds. Camilla existed as an uncomfortable reality that Britain learned to live with. But everything changed when the word Queen appeared before her name. That title became a trigger for collective memory. It was no longer a story about the woman standing behind the king. It became the story of the woman who had finally taken the position many believed Diana deserved. When Camilla appeared wearing a crown tied to the legacy of Queen Mary, old controversies immediately exploded again. Articles about Diana saw massive increases in traffic. Old interviews resurfaced. Debates about betrayal and justice returned across social media. A former royal advisor once revealed that the palace's real goal was never to make the public love Camilla. They understood that was nearly impossible. Their more realistic goal was simply to make the public stop hating her. But by 2026, even that modest goal appears to be failing. Even worse, the contrast within the royal family is becoming more obvious. While support for Camilla continues to decline, Prince William and Catherine continue to lead popularity rankings. They are seen as the stable future of the monarchy. They represent youth, a scandal-free image. And most importantly, they remind people of Diana in the most positive way possible. Many people inside the palace understand exactly where the real problem lies. Every time Camilla is pushed higher, memories of Diana come back even stronger. It is a vicious cycle that no media campaign has been able to break. Camilla achieved the title she pursued for decades. She has the crown. She has status. She has reached a place in history that very few women have ever touched. But the YouGov survey exposed the most painful truth of all. You can win a throne through patience. You can gain a title through marriage. But you cannot force an entire nation to forget the woman they once saw as the people's princess. And this is only the first sign that the wall protecting Camilla is beginning to collapse. Because public indifference is still not her greatest nightmare. Time is the force quietly taking away the last form of power she still has left. While the numbers from the YouGov survey sent Buckingham Palace into panic, Camilla could still comfort herself with the idea that public opinion always changes. The public may be angry today and forget tomorrow. Negative headlines can be replaced by another major event. But there is one enemy that even royal power cannot control: her own body. In late 2024, an announcement from the palace confirmed that Camilla was forced to cancel a series of engagements after being diagnosed with pneumonia. Surprising many people, royal media outlets tried to present it as only a temporary health issue. They emphasized that she needed a short period of rest and would soon return to her duties. But behind those reassuring statements was a far more troubling reality. People working closely with Camilla began admitting that her physical strength had noticeably declined in recent years. At 78 years old, Camilla is no longer the woman who can easily maintain the demanding schedule of a queen. Long overseas tours, ceremonies that require standing for hours, constant diplomatic meetings, and the pressure to always appear stable have placed enormous strain on her body. Many royal sources revealed that Camilla has also endured chronic leg pain for a long time. The pain reportedly appears more frequently after major events. There are days when she has almost had to rely entirely on support staff behind the scenes just to complete her schedule. But the public rarely sees that reality. They only see carefully controlled photographs. They only see brief smiles in front of cameras. What they do not see is the exhaustion becoming more visible behind palace doors. The situation became even more serious when King Charles faced health problems of his own. As the king reduced his public schedule for medical treatment, the burden of representing the monarchy fell on Camilla more than ever before. Ironically, the woman once criticized for breaking apart a marriage now finds herself struggling to protect the image of the very institution that once viewed her as an outsider. There were weeks when Camilla appeared at public events non-stop with an unusually heavy schedule. Royal experts began questioning whether the palace was pushing her beyond her physical limits. Then close-up photographs began fueling cruel debates across the media. High-resolution cameras do not lie. The signs of aging became visible on Camilla's face. Exhaustion appeared in her eyes. Her slower, heavier steps began drawing public attention. A painful contrast immediately formed in the public's mind. Diana remains forever frozen at the age of 36. She lives eternally in public memory as radiant, energetic, and tragic. Camilla is the opposite. The public watches her grow older year after year right before their eyes. Every appearance under flashing cameras places her beside the nearly immortal memory of Diana. It is an invisible competition that Camilla can never win. Diana never grew old. Diana never had to face the cruelty of aging. Her image was frozen during the most beautiful period of her life. Camilla, meanwhile, has had to live with that comparison every single day. A former royal editor once made a bitter observation that time has become Diana's most loyal spokesperson. Every wrinkle that appears on Camilla's face unintentionally revives Diana's youthful image in public memory. What makes it even more painful is that Camilla understands this very well. She knows that no matter what she does, she cannot escape the shadow of a woman who died nearly 3 decades ago. For many years, Camilla could endure public hatred because she still had Charles by her side. He was her strongest political shield. He was the man who secured her place within the royal family. But as Charles's health weakens, her greatest fear begins to emerge. What happens if one day Camilla must face the royal family without Charles standing between her and those who oppose her? What happens if she loses the man she spent her entire life trying to have? At 78 years old, Camilla is not only fighting public opinion, she is fighting time, illness, and the reality that the human body always has limits. She spent more than half a century climbing to the peak of power, but now, her own body seems to be rebelling just as she has finally reached her ultimate victory. Her body is beginning to fail her, but perhaps physical pain is still not as painful as the feeling of being rejected by the very walls of Buckingham Palace. Even more frightening, as her health begins to decline, Camilla is realizing that physical pain may not be the greatest punishment life has prepared for her. A person can fight illness if loyal allies still remain behind them. But in the history of the British royal family, what has destroyed powerful figures most often has never been hospitals or doctors. It has been loneliness. And by 2026, that loneliness is quietly moving through every hallway of Buckingham Palace in the coldest way possible. Prince Andrew's scandal suddenly exploded again as more documents connected to Jeffrey Epstein continued to be examined by international media. Although Andrew continues to deny all accusations and tries to remain silent, the British public is no longer as patient as before. Small protests began appearing outside royal events. Signs demanding that Andrew be stripped of all royal privileges continued to appear. Protesters shouted that the royal family had protected the wrong person for many years. The most bitter part was that Camilla had to stand right beside Charles during that moment. At one public event, as Charles stepped out of a car to greet the crowd, loud boos suddenly erupted with people shouting the names Andrew and Epstein. Some shouted that the royal family was a place that hides scandals. Others directly criticized the king. Security teams reacted immediately. Television cameras quickly changed angles. But videos recorded by members of the public spread across social media at an explosive speed. Camilla stood beside Charles with her familiar stiff smile. But body language experts quickly pointed out the tension in her eyes and the stiffness in her shoulders. It was not a scandal she created. But like so many moments in her life, Camilla once again found herself standing in the center of public anger. What made everything even worse was William's quiet but extremely cold response. If this had happened 10 years ago, William might have remained silent for the sake of royal stability. But William in 2026 is completely different. He is no longer the boy walking behind Diana's coffin in pain. He is no longer the son who reluctantly accepted Camilla to keep peace with his father. Sources close to the family revealed that William is quietly reshaping the future balance of power. He wants a slimmer monarchy, fewer scandals, less controversy, fewer divisive figures, and that has caused many people inside the palace to begin asking a very sensitive question. In that future, where will Camilla stand? Andrew represents everything William wants to remove. But to many younger members of the royal family, Camilla also represents a deeply controversial era they want to close as quickly as possible. while William and Catherine continue to appear as the perfect image of the monarchy's future. Charles and Camilla increasingly reflect the image of an aging reign struggling to protect itself. That contrast is becoming more obvious in the eyes of the public. But the biggest shock did not come from the media. It came from inside the palace. A former royal staff member revealed that in private conversations, some longtime employees had started referring to Camilla by the nickname Queen Dowager. It was an incredibly subtle insult. In royal tradition, that title is usually reserved for the widow of a deceased king, but Charles is still alive. The fact that this name began appearing in private conversations sounded like a cruel reminder that many people see Camilla as a temporary figure. An uncomfortable transition between the era of Charles and the era of William. Camilla understands exactly how dangerous those whispers can be. Inside the royal family, real power does not exist in public speeches. It exists in what is said behind closed doors. When staff members begin creating nicknames for you, it is often a sign that respect is beginning to crack, and other warning signs began to appear. Camilla is being mentioned less and less in the royal family's long-term plans. Media attention is now focused almost entirely on William and Catherine. Younger palace advisors have begun building image strategies around the next generation. Camilla still appears in public. She still smiles. She still completes her duties. But with each passing day, she seems more like someone walking through rooms where she never truly belonged. That may be the most bitter punishment of all. She spent more than half a century trying to win Charles's heart. Then she spent years trying to enter the gates of the royal family. Then she continued fighting to claim the crown. But the moment she reached the peak of power, she realized that she is still viewed as an outsider by many people. Outside Buckingham Palace are the boos of the public. Inside the palace are whispers filled with contempt. Ahead of her stands an increasingly powerful William. Behind her remains Diana's past, a memory that has never truly died. Charles is still there, but his declining health continues to make him more fragile. And for the first time in many years, Camilla is beginning to face the question she has always tried to avoid. What happens when the only person who truly protected her is no longer strong enough to protect her anymore? The woman who once defeated public outrage to enter the royal family is now trapped inside the very golden cage she spent her entire life chasing. And as support from the outside disappears, and loyalty inside the palace begins to weaken, Camilla is left clinging to the last thing she believed she could control, her legacy. But when looking back at that entire journey, the most terrifying question still remains. What exactly is her legacy beyond the boos that have never truly stopped? As Camilla finds herself surrounded by terrible poll numbers, whispers inside the palace, and a growing sense of isolation in the very place she once viewed as the final destination of her life. An even more brutal reality is unfolding quietly every day. Camilla's greatest rival is not the media, not William, and not even the protesters standing outside Buckingham Palace. Her greatest rival is a woman who died nearly 3 decades ago, yet seems to have never truly left the royal family. That woman is Diana. Every year, thousands of people still travel to Kensington Palace to stand before the statue of Diana, Princess of Wales, which was commissioned by her 2 sons. What confuses many people inside the royal family is that not all of those visitors belong to the generation that saw Diana alive. Many were born after the Paris crash. Yet they still bring flowers, handwritten letters, and small gifts to place beneath her statue. They cry for a woman they never met. They protect the memory of a woman who exists for them only through old footage. And they still call Diana by the title that no royal media campaign has ever been able to replace: the People's Princess. That is Camilla's greatest failure. She may have won the title. She may have entered the palace. She may have become the legal wife of King Charles III. But she never won the emotional place Diana left in the hearts of the public. And over time, that place has not weakened. It has become even more immortal. Documentaries about Diana continue to attract massive viewership across online platforms. Her old interviews continue spreading rapidly across TikTok and YouTube. Her famous statement about there being 3 people in that marriage continues to live on as a symbol of popular culture. For younger generations, Diana is not an outdated historical story. She represents a woman who was betrayed, yet preserved her dignity until her final moments. Meanwhile, Camilla continues to face deeply harsh reactions. At several royal satire shows in London, a repeated pattern has drawn media attention. Every time a character inspired by Camilla walks onto the stage, part of the audience still responds with boos, not because they hate the actor. They are reacting to what that character represents. But when a character portraying Diana appears, the entire theater often falls silent or erupts into long rounds of applause. Why does this still happen nearly 3 decades later? Because Diana moved beyond the limits of an ordinary royal figure. She became a symbol. Symbols do not grow old. Symbols do not make new mistakes. Symbols do not have to live through controversial decisions every day. Symbols are frozen at their most beautiful moment in public memory. Camilla is the opposite. She is the one currently holding the position. She lives under the intense scrutiny of the present. Every step she takes is analyzed. Every facial expression is examined. Every appearance wearing the crown reminds the public of the woman many believe once deserved that position. But the most painful blow for Camilla does not come from strangers bringing flowers to Kensington Palace. It comes from the 2 people who now represent the future of the monarchy. Prince William is increasingly becoming the strongest reminder of Diana, not only because he resembles his mother more and more in recent photographs, but also because of the way he protects his family with almost absolute determination. The public sees Diana's fighting spirit in William, a man willing to challenge the system if he believes his family is under threat. Catherine, Princess of Wales, has also recreated many of the qualities that once made Diana beloved around the world: her grace in public, her image as a devoted mother, her ability to make royal events feel emotional and relatable. Catherine is not trying to become Diana, but the less she tries, the more the public sees that powerful continuation. This is what hurts Camilla the most. She spent decades trying to step out of Diana's shadow. But now that shadow does not exist only in memory. It lives through the public image of William and Catherine every single day. Every time crowds cheer for William and Catherine, it becomes another reminder that Diana's emotional legacy still dominates the monarchy. Every time the media praises them as the future of the royal family, Camilla is pushed even farther from the public's heart. She has the crown. Catherine does not. She holds the higher title today. But almost everyone understands that Catherine is the woman the public is waiting for in the future. That is the most bitter irony of Camilla's entire life. She won the battle for official status. But Diana won the far more important battle. The battle for people's hearts. Camilla has the throne. Diana has immortality. And history always gives longer chapters to symbols that move the world than to people who simply hold power for a brief period of time. In the end, as the spotlight of power slowly begins to fade, the most brutal truth becomes impossible to hide. There are things a crown can give, but the hearts of the people are never one of them. Looking back at this entire journey, what makes Queen Camilla's story so haunting is not the titles she achieved. It is the price she had to pay after reaching everything she wanted. More than 50 years ago, she was simply a woman standing in the shadows of a love affair condemned by the world. Then, step by step, she got the man she wanted. She kept King Charles III. She pushed through every criticism to enter the royal family. She watched doors that were once slammed in her face finally open. And then she claimed the crown that millions believed should have belonged to Diana, Princess of Wales. But look at the 15 signs we have explored. The public is becoming colder. Polls show that support for her is growing more fragile. Her body is weakening after repeated health issues. The boos outside palace gates are growing louder. The whispers inside the palace are becoming colder. A future that Prince William is quietly reshaping has made her position more fragile than ever. And above all, Diana's shadow has never disappeared. In many ways, it has only grown stronger with time. That is the cruelest irony of all. Diana died in Paris at the age of 36, in tragedy. But time transformed her into an immortal symbol. People still bring flowers to Kensington Palace. People still speak her name with love. People still see her legacy in William and Catherine, Princess of Wales. Meanwhile, Camilla is still alive, still wearing the crown, yet forced to watch her own image slowly erode under growing public doubt. Perhaps karma does not arrive like a lightning strike from the sky. It does not come through one sudden fall. It arrives like endless rain over many years, slowly sinking into every heavy step taken across royal red carpets. It forces someone who has everything to ask whether they truly won at all. Camilla has Charles. Camilla has the title. Camilla has royal luxury. But she may have lost something far more valuable: peace, respect, and a future remembered by history with love. This story proves that history always finds its own way to deliver justice. What do you think? Is this the tragedy of a woman who pursued love until the very end? Or the price of choices made in the past? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next shocking royal story. Thank you for watching. The pounding sound of horse hooves tore through the silent night across the English countryside. It was followed by the panicked, heavy breathing of a woman. Then suddenly, a sharp crashing sound rang out as a crystal glass shattered onto the marble floor at Clarence's house. According to multiple internal sources that have never been publicly confirmed, that was believed to be the moment a highly secret recording began circulating among the British aristocracy, carrying whispers powerful enough to destroy the polished image of the modern royal family. The story reportedly began during Cows Week in 2025. It was meant to be a luxurious sailing event where members of the royal family regularly appeared to maintain an image of unity before the public. But behind the polite smiles and perfectly timed waves for the cameras, a silent power struggle was unfolding more fiercely than ever. On one side stood Princess Anne, the woman widely regarded as the hardest-working and most loyal member of the royal family. Someone who had always placed the honor of the crown above personal interest. Standing beside her was Sir Timothy Lawrence, her quiet husband, known for his absolute loyalty. On the opposite side was Queen Camilla, the woman who had once faced fierce public criticism but ultimately rose to the throne. And according to the rumors now spreading, she was allegedly willing to do whatever it took to protect her position. The most frightening part was not the rumors themselves. It was the question now shaking all of Britain. Was that so-called horseback riding accident truly just an accident? Before we go deeper into this shocking secret, tell me what you think. If you stand with Princess Anne, comment number 1. If you believe Camilla is powerful enough to erase every trace, comment number 2. The sky above the Isle of Wight that afternoon was almost perfectly beautiful. The final rays of sunlight shone across the deep blue sea. Dozens of luxury yachts lined the sparkling waters. And Cows Week in 2025 was unfolding exactly as Britain. Its elite expected. Luxurious, private, and deeply symbolic. Along the harbor, custom-made gowns, perfectly pressed naval uniforms, the sound of champagne glasses clinking together, and aristocratic greetings created a scene that convinced the public the British royal family remained a symbol of order and class. But like so many royal events throughout history, the most dangerous things rarely happened in front of cameras. They happened in the shadows the public was never allowed to see. Princess Anne appeared in a simple outfit that still carried undeniable presence. She had always been that way. She did not need sparkling diamonds or meaningless displays of extravagance to command attention. Her presence alone was enough to make senior military officials step forward to shake her hand. Among them were former officers who had once served alongside Sir Timothy Lawrence. The man standing beside Anne with the calm and familiar composure of a former Royal Navy admiral. According to military records that had previously been made public, Sir Timothy had spent more than 10,000 hours working on undersea missions throughout his naval career. He served aboard major warships, endured high-pressure operations, and was widely regarded as one of the most respected officers of his generation. To the military, he was a symbol of honor. To Anne, he was a quiet but unwavering source of strength for many years. And then Camilla arrived. Her appearance immediately changed the atmosphere, not because of respect, but because of a tension that was difficult to describe. Camilla wore a luxurious emerald green dress and flashed her familiar smile at the crowd. But according to several staff members present that day, her eyes repeatedly turned toward Anne with a noticeable coldness. At first, the conversation remained normal. A few polite exchanges, forced laughter. But then everything quickly spiraled out of control. According to what was allegedly captured in the leaked recording, Camilla suddenly turned toward Sir Timothy in front of several former naval officers and mockingly said that it was fascinating to hear people who had spent their lives at the bottom of the ocean talk about honor. While the real world was run by people who understood how power truly worked, the room nearly froze. One former naval commander was reportedly gripping his glass so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Princess Anne? Its expression changed instantly. Sir Timothy remained silent, but those standing nearby said his eyes looked completely different in that moment. It was not the look of a man who felt personally insulted. It was the look of a military officer watching the honor of an entire lifetime being publicly humiliated. 10,000 hours beneath the ocean, decades of service to the crown, missions the public would never even know existed. All of it erased in just 15 seconds of arrogant contempt. Camilla seemed unaware that she had just crossed a dangerous line. She continued to smile as if it had all been an innocent joke. But that exact moment changed how Anne, its loyal supporters, viewed the silent power struggle inside the royal family. Behind the dinner area, hidden by white decorative flower arrangements surrounding the reception space, Giles, a young aide who had once worked for a senior palace figure, stood frozen. He understood that what had just happened was far more than a simple exchange of sharp words. According to an anonymous source, Giles quietly pulled his phone from his jacket pocket. His fingers trembled slightly. He looked around to make sure no one was watching. Then he pressed record, an action that lasted less than 2 seconds. But those 2 seconds changed everything. While fake laughter continued echoing through the dinner party, Giles, its recording device, quietly captured sounds that Clarence House was later rumored to be willing to do anything to bury. Camilla had no idea that in the darkness behind those lavish decorative flowers, the first nail had already been driven into the coffin of her reputation. The recording that Giles secretly captured on the night of Cow's Week did not immediately become a public scandal. No tabloid newspaper ran an explosive headline the next morning. No leaked video surfaced on social media. Instead, everything unfolded in a far more terrifying way. The recording moved silently through the most private corridors of power in Britain. Like a ticking time bomb passed from one hand to another under absolute secrecy. Just 36 hours after the lavish party on the Isle of Wight, the device containing the recording appeared on Princess Anne, its desk at Gatcombe Park. According to a former logistics staff member who once served the royal household, the package arrived close to midnight, delivered by a driver with no official identification, no private secretary, no familiar security team. None of the standard procedures normally attached to internal royal documents. That alone was enough for Anne to understand that what she was about to hear could change everything. Inside her office, lit only by the dim golden glow of an antique desk lamp. Anne opened the small black box. Inside was only an old phone and a handwritten note with a short message. "You need to hear this before it is too late." Sir Timothy Lawrence sat across from his wife. The man who had spent more than 10,000 hours serving beneath the ocean still carried the calm composure of a naval officer. But his eyes revealed that he also sensed something terrible was coming. Anne pressed play. Only seconds later. "Camilla." That's voice echoed through the quiet room. Every word of contempt cut through the air like a blade. The mocking remarks aimed at Sir Timothy. Its naval career. The dismissive laughter in front of former officers. Decades of service from one man erased in just 15 seconds of arrogance. When the recording ended, Anne did not react immediately. That was what worried Sir Timothy the most. He spoke first, saying that his personal honor was not worth turning into an internal war that could destroy the image of the monarchy. But Anne remained silent. Those who knew her well understood that Princess Anne's silence was always more frightening than any outburst of anger. This was the woman who once stared directly into the barrel of a kidnapper. This gun in 1974, and coldly refused to become a hostage. This was the woman British newspapers once called the toughest member of the House of Windsor. And in that moment, that coldness was returning. The next morning, Anne requested a private meeting at Clarence House. No assistants, no secretarias, no media advisors. Just two women standing at opposite ends of a power war the public knew nothing about. Clarence House that day looked as peaceful as ever. Tea attendants moved quietly through the halls. Security guards stood motionless at their posts. Royal portraits on the walls still projected an image of tradition and dignity. But behind the doors of the private reception room, the atmosphere was entirely different. Camilla entered with a level of calm that seemed almost unbelievable. According to one staff member who served at the residence, she even smiled lightly and asked Anne if she would like tea. That gesture did not ease the tension. It only made its anger colder. Without saying a word, Anne placed the phone on the table and pressed play. The room was immediately filled with Camilla. The own voice from the night of Cowes Week. At first, Camilla showed no reaction. She crossed her arms, leaned back in her chair, and listened as if it were someone else. Let's conversation. But when the recording reached the moment where she publicly humiliated Sir Timothy, the smile on her face disappeared for a few brief seconds. Anne finally spoke. Her voice was low, but it was enough to make the entire room feel cold. She told Camilla that she had 48 hours. According to multiple internal sources, Anne demanded that Camilla publicly apologize to Sir Timothy and the former naval officers who were present at Cowes Week. If she refused, the recording would be sent to national media outlets, senior parliamentary advisors, and influential figures within the military. It was not an emotional outburst. It was an ultimatum, calculated with precision by a woman who understood that reputation was the one thing a modern monarchy could not afford to lose. Camilla stared at Anne for a long time. Then she laughed. It was not uncontrolled laughter. It was a small, slow, deeply unsettling smile. According to accounts whispered within Clarence House, Camilla said Anne was overestimating the power of a recording and underestimating her ability to control a crisis. Anne stood up immediately. Before leaving, she looked directly at Camilla and said that military honor was not something anyone should treat as entertainment. Anne turned and walked toward the large door. But just as her hand touched the handle, she instinctively looked back. That moment later became the detail that sent chills through so many people. Camilla was still sitting in her chair, calm, relaxed, and on her lips was a faint smile that felt terrifyingly cold. It was not the face of someone cornered with no way out. It was the face of someone who had already found another solution. A much darker solution. And only days later, when threats failed to break the steel bloodline of Windsor, everything began moving in a direction no one could have imagined. A horseback riding accident was being prepared to become Princess Anne. Es permanent silence. Leaving Clarence House with the 48-hour ultimatum still hanging between the two most powerful women in the royal family. Princess Anne believed she had pushed Camilla into a corner. Under normal logic, a recording powerful enough to destroy the Queen. Its reputation should have forced her to back down, or at the very least, negotiate in silence. But according to what multiple internal sources later revealed, Anne made a fatal mistake. She judged Camilla by the standards of honor, while the woman who remained inside Clarence House appeared to think only through the instincts of political survival. Just hours after that confrontation, one name began appearing in whispers behind palace walls. Marcus. No full surname. No public record. No clear image in the media. According to a former security staff member who once worked high-level royal events, Marcus was known as someone who handled situations the royal family never wanted, documented on official paper. He had reportedly served in a secret military unit before disappearing from public service records. After that, his name occasionally surfaced during sensitive crises involving aristocratic circles, always connected to one chilling pattern: no evidence left behind. According to an anonymous source, the call from Clarence House was made close to 1 in the morning. The conversation lasted less than 4 minutes. No one knows exactly what was said, but the next morning Marcus was reportedly seen near Gatcombe Park in a vehicle with no identifying plates. He was accompanied by 2 other men, described as carrying themselves like former professional military operatives. At the same time, Anne had no idea that the clock on her life was already counting down. She continued her normal schedule at Gatcombe Park, including a weekend charity horseback riding event where she was expected to appear with her favorite horse named Storm. This was the same horse Anne had ridden during many important events and was considered extremely reliable. That reliability made the plan even more perfect. If Storm suddenly caused an accident, very few people would suspect human involvement. According to an internal report that allegedly once existed before mysteriously disappearing, Marcus and his team gained access to the stables by posing as event logistics inspectors. They had temporary authorization. They had proper uniforms. They appeared natural enough that no one questioned them. A horse caretaker later revealed that he felt something was unusual when he noticed a stranger spending too much time near Storm, its saddle area. But only hours later he was unexpectedly reassigned to another section for reasons that were never explained. The most terrifying detail involved the saddle. According to a former equestrian expert who later analyzed the incident, all it would take was loosening a critical locking component at a level nearly impossible to detect with the naked eye. The saddle would appear completely normal in the early stages, but it would lose stability once the rider accelerated or cleared an obstacle. That was not a random technical failure. It was a precisely calculated trap. The obstacle that was chosen also sent chills through many people when they looked back at the incident. 1.2 meters. High enough to create a devastating impact to the head and neck if the rider lost balance during landing. According to a sports medicine expert cited in an unofficial document, a fall from that height could easily cause severe brain trauma or an immediate broken neck. While all eyes at Gatcombe Park were focused on the glamorous charity riding competition, Clarence House was wrapped in an unusually quiet atmosphere. According to a former staff member who later resigned, Camilla spent most of the afternoon inside her private room. She received no guests. She joined no public calls. She simply sat by the window, holding a glass of aged cognac. The detail that left many people deeply unsettled came from that same staff member. He said Camilla showed almost no emotion, no anxiety, no nervousness. She simply took slow sips of cognac, stared into the garden, and asked only one question when her phone vibrated. "Is it over?" Meanwhile, at Gatcombe Park, cheers erupted as Anne appeared on Storm. She carried her usual powerful presence, making it impossible for anyone to imagine this could be the final ride of her life. Storm moved steadily through the first obstacles. The audience applauded. Cameras captured every moment. Then came the 1.2-meter obstacle. The moment Storm leaped into the air, the loosened saddle lock finally slipped out of place. Everything happened in less than 2 seconds. Anne lost her balance point. Her body was violently thrown to the right before she was completely launched off the horse. Her head crashed directly toward the solid wooden barrier below. The sound of impact echoed through the air. The cheering instantly turned into screams of horror. Sir Timothy rushed from the spectator area. Medical staff ran into chaos. Some members of the audience burst into tears after seeing Anne lying motionless on the ground. But in the middle of that chaos, according to a deeply controversial internal source, there was someone at Clarence House staring at a phone screen and smiling with satisfaction. The moment Princess Anne, its body slammed into the ground at Gatcombe Park. Many people believed they had just witnessed the final chapter of the toughest woman in the House of Windsor. Medical personnel rushed onto the field as the crowd screamed in panic. Sir Timothy nearly lost control as he ran through security barriers to reach his wife. According to one witness present that day, Anne remained motionless for several seconds, sending the entire area into panic. Blood appeared near her temple. Her protective helmet was partially shattered after the violent collision with the wooden barrier. A medical helicopter was urgently deployed and landed on the field within minutes. As Anne was lifted onto a stretcher, many people truly believed Britain was about to face another royal tragedy. The media immediately described it as a serious sporting accident. Early reports framed the fall as an unfortunate incident in an equestrian sport that had always carried risks. But strange details began to emerge only hours later. According to sources from Sir Timothy, that's private security team, technical investigators examining the scene discovered unusual signs on Storm. Its saddle, one safety lock had been tampered with using specialized tools. A leather strap had been cut with unusual precision near the stable area. Sir Timothy's team also collected 3 suspicious pieces of evidence: a black glove that did not belong to any employee at Gatcombe Park, a small electronic device believed to have been used to disable security cameras for a short period of time, and a fake access card identifying someone as part of the event logistics team. 3 small items that were enough to make the accident theory begin to collapse. Meanwhile, at the hospital, its condition became a tightly guarded secret. Some sources claimed she suffered severe brain trauma. Others said damage to her neck vertebrae threatened her long-term mobility. But then something happened that shocked many people. Just 48 hours after emergency surgery, Anne woke up. According to an anonymous doctor who later spoke about the case, the first question she asked was not about her own health. She asked about Storm and whether anyone had touched the saddle before the competition. That question alone made everyone in the room realize that Anne had already begun connecting the dots. But the nightmare was not over. 3 days after the accident, an unexpected figure appeared at the hospital. Edward, a longtime aide who had worked at Clarence House. He arrived in a state of visible panic. According to security sources, Edward demanded a private meeting with Sir Timothy and claimed that if he did not tell the truth immediately, he might disappear forever. Inside a heavily guarded private room, Edward handed over a data storage device. Inside was a new recording that left even Sir Timothy speechless. It was allegedly a conversation between Marcus and a woman whose voice was described as sounding very similar to Camilla. The recording directly mentioned the horse, the 1.2-meter obstacle, and the most haunting phrase of all: the accident must look natural. According to a former legal expert brought in to evaluate the recording, if the material were authenticated, this was no longer a royal scandal. It was a deliberate murder conspiracy. And then the situation became even more terrifying. The following night, while Anne was still recovering in intensive care, the hospital security system suddenly detected 2 men disguised as technical staff attempting to access her treatment floor. According to an internal report that was later leaked, they carried fake identification documents and attempted to enter the medical records storage area. One of them was even caught trying to enter Anne. This hospital room during a security shift change. But this time, things did not go according to plan. Sir Timothy had anticipated the danger. The former admiral, who had spent decades navigating military operations, quietly deployed a private security team around the hospital without making any public announcement. The moment the two strangers stepped into the hallway leading to Anne, 10, his hospital room, they were immediately stopped. A brief struggle broke out before police were called. According to one witness, Sir Timothy appeared with a face so cold it terrified everyone around him and said only one sentence to the men who had been captured. This time, "You have gone too far." News of the attempted break-in was kept secret for nearly 24 hours. But by then, Sir Timothy understood that this was no longer an internal family battle. If he remained silent, Anne might not survive a second time. And then came the decision that shook the entire royal family. All of the evidence from the scene, Giles. Its recording. The recording handed over by Edward. The hospital intrusion reports. Everything was delivered to an independent investigative team and several senior journalists. That evening, as Britain prepared to settle into its usual prime-time television hours, a special report began appearing on screens in millions of homes. And it was not just a news report. It was an atomic bomb dropped directly onto the crown sitting on Camilla, N.S. head. The special broadcast that aired during prime time that night created an impact that even veteran British media editors could not fully imagine. Within minutes of Giles, its recording, the evidence from Gatcombe Park, and Edward, that's testimony being revealed, the entire nation fell into shock. People who had once viewed Princess Anne, this riding accident, as a tragic mishap, now began seeing it as a cold-blooded conspiracy hidden behind royal velvet curtains. But the strongest backlash did not come from the public. It came from a force Camilla had seemingly underestimated from the very beginning: the British military. When the recording of Camilla insulting Sir Timothy was replayed on national television, former admirals, retired naval officers, and veterans' organizations immediately began speaking out. To them, this was no longer an internal dispute between members of the royal family. It was a direct insult to military honor. One retired general appeared on morning television and said that no one, including the highest-ranking royal figure, had the right to disrespect people who had dedicated their lives to the nation. His statement quickly spread across Britain and ignited an unprecedented wave of outrage. Outside Buckingham Palace and Clarence House, crowds began growing larger by the hour. Signs demanding an independent investigation appeared everywhere. Some veterans stood silently outside palace gates, wearing full military uniforms covered in medals, delivering a protest without words that felt incredibly powerful. International media began calling it the most serious royal crisis since the death of Princess Diana, and while media advisors scrambled to control the situation, pressure on King Charles intensified by the hour. According to multiple internal sources, the king endured one of the most painful nights of his reign. On one side stood the wife he had defended for decades despite public opposition. On the other side was his own sister, lying in a hospital bed after an alleged assassination attempt linked to the Queen. And behind it all was the threat of the monarchy collapsing if he appeared to be protecting her. The emergency meeting that lasted through the night at Buckingham Palace reportedly ended with the most painful decision of Charles: let's life. The following morning, a royal decree was signed in private. Within 24 hours, 15 prestigious honorary military titles once held by Camilla were completely revoked. The speed was unprecedented in modern royal history. Titles, once viewed as symbols of her authority, were stripped away so quickly that many royal experts described it as an historic purge. But what happened behind the doors of Clarence House was even more chilling. According to a former household staff member, The atmosphere inside the residence changed overnight. People who once bowed their heads to Camilla now kept a cold distance. Some employees suddenly requested leave. Others avoided direct communication with her. Even her most loyal aides began disappearing from familiar hallways. Camilla became isolated inside the very place that had once been the center of her power. One image described by a former staff member later haunted many people. Camilla sat alone inside a luxurious room at Clarence's house, surrounded by expensive paintings, lavish furniture, and warm golden lights. But the entire space no longer looked powerful. It looked more like a golden cage. The glass of wine on her table remained untouched. Her phone barely rang. The praise was gone. The powerful meetings were gone. All that remained was the cold silence of an empire collapsing from within. According to sources close to the situation, Camilla repeatedly tried to contact Charles but received only brief responses through his private secretary. The marriage that once divided Britain had now entered its coldest chapter. The woman who once defeated public opinion to reach the throne was ultimately destroyed by her own limitless ambition. And in the end, behind the red brick walls of Clarence's house, the only thing left for Camilla was not power or fame. It was the echo of late regret in the darkness. Ladies and gentlemen, just weeks after Britain endured the biggest royal earthquake in years, millions of people once again turned their attention toward Portsmouth. But this time, they were not watching a scandal, a hearing, or a shocking investigative report. They were waiting for the appearance of a woman many believed would never stand again. That morning, powerful sea winds swept across the harbor. Rows of perfectly dressed military personnel stood in silence. Veterans covered in medals stared toward the ceremonial stage. And then Princess Anne appeared. No wheelchair, no special assistance, no sign that she wanted to become a symbol of pity. Anne walked slowly but firmly as thunderous applause erupted and continued for several minutes. Sir Timothy stood in the distance, his expression quiet but filled with pride. That moment moved countless people because they understood that this woman had survived something that should have ended her life. Throughout today, that story. We have witnessed how power can make people dangerously ruthless. We have seen arrogance, cold, calculated conspiracies, and the devastating price of limitless ambition. Camilla once had everything many people dream about: titles, wealth, power. But in the end, it all collapsed because of one thing she could never buy: real respect. Anne, on the other hand, never chased the crown. She never fought for the spotlight, but through loyalty, courage, and honor, she became a symbol that people will remember for generations. Because the final truth is very simple: power can be borrowed, titles can be taken away, but honor is something every person must build through their own actions. A crown may create a king, but honor creates a legend. Thank you for staying with me through today. As video. If Princess Anne, its story of resilience made you think, please like and subscribe to support the channel. And do not forget to watch the video now appearing on your screen, because the next secret about King Charles is waiting for you to uncover.
It is my view that the deceitful way the interview was obtained substantially influenced what my mother said. The interview was a major contribution to making my parents' relationship worse, and has since hurt countless others.
The silent corridors of Buckingham Palace's West Wing recently became the stage for a ruthless financial decapitation that has effectively shattered the Parker Bowles family's influence. This was far from a routine administrative adjustment. It was a clinical, cold-blooded exercise of sovereign authority designed to dismantle a private empire. Details of this power shift emerged from classified document C-74, a file pulled from the most restricted archives of the Duchy of Cornwall. With a single, decisive signature, the Prince of Wales authorized an immediate and total freeze on the credit lines and stipends of 12 key figures within Queen Camilla's inner circle. This is no longer a mere palace whisper or a tabloid rumor. It is a surgical strike against a hidden financial network that has operated in the shadows for decades. Witnesses near the scene report that the air in the hallway turned to ice the moment William confronted Camilla, looking her directly in the eyes. He delivered a devastating 7-word ultimatum that has fundamentally redirected the trajectory of the British monarchy. "The treasury is not your private dowry." The prince turned his back and walked away before the queen consort could utter a single word of defense, leaving her in a state of visible, trembling shock. The gravity of those 7 words marks the definitive end of an era and the dawn of a harsh, uncompromising new reality for the House of Windsor. The situation spiraled into total disarray almost instantly. While the global community watches this internal royal warfare in disbelief, it is important to recognize that this was no impulsive act. It was a maneuver, months in development. The leaked C-74 file reveals a deliberate strategy where the prince sidestepped long-standing protocols to seize absolute control of the royal finances. This was a preemptive strike, a move William felt was necessary to safeguard the crown's integrity against what he perceives as a decades-long infiltration of the royal treasury. While the queen consort stood frozen in the West Wing, digital commands were already hitting the servers at Coutts & Company, the monarchy's private bank. Within a mere 60 seconds of the confrontation, the financial pulse of the Parker Bowles clan was flatlined. Their secondary credit cards, private security stipends, and access to the duchy's immense wealth simply vanished. William didn't just limit their budget, he effectively revoked their standing within the House of Windsor. As global curiosity peaks, the central question remains, what did the prince discover in those archives to justify such a ruthless blow? Stick with us as we dismantle the Parker Bowles financial network and see how the royal facade finally crumbled. The path to this moment is a twisted maze of institutional betrayal and hidden offshore accounts. This brutal display of power stems from Operation Clean Slate, a forensic examination of the royal books that was far more intense than a standard audit. A specialized team of 5 experts, handpicked from the National Audit Office and Duchy Security, conducted this financial autopsy. The process began in the spring of 2025, sparked by anonymous tips regarding the suspiciously high security costs associated with the Queen's family. Working under the cover of darkness in the secure vaults of the Sandringham House Library, these investigators uncovered a massive breach of public trust. Their final report, titled Legacy Alpha, confirmed that nearly £15 million had been diverted from the sovereign grant and the duchy's reserves. It wasn't just the sheer scale of the theft that enraged William, but the sophisticated deception behind it. The audit exposed a web of 8 different shell companies located in opaque tax havens. These entities weren't providing security for the palace instead. They served as channels to fund luxury travel and pay off the private debts of 12 individuals who hold no official constitutional role. In early March of 2026, the Prince of Wales concluded his review of these damning files. In the absolute silence of the library, illuminated only by the dim glow of computer screens, he tracked over £4 million funneled into sham consultancy firms owned by Camilla's siblings. These were paper entities designed for one purpose: to bleed the crown's wealth into private pockets. William's response wasn't a burst of anger, but a chilling, calculated resolve. After finishing the audit, he reportedly spent 4 solitary hours in the gallery, sitting directly beneath the portrait of his late mother, Princess Diana. For him, this wasn't just about the money. It was a crusade to protect the sanctity of the institution. His mother belonged to an institution he felt was being undermined. When he finally rose from that chair, the Parker Bowles era was effectively over. The architecture of Operation Clean Slate was engineered to be absolute and irreversible, understanding that involving Parliament would only trigger months of public scandal and political gridlock. The Prince of Wales reached for a much sharper tool, a rarely invoked clause within the Sovereign Grant Act. By legally framing the misuse of funds as a direct threat to the inheritance and security of his own children, William bypassed the need for a public vote. A high-priority digital command was dispatched to the executive suites of Coutts and Company, the monarchy's gatekeeper bank. This was no mere suggestion from a royal client. It was an ironclad order from the future king. The mandate demanded the immediate termination of all secondary accounts and the total revocation of corporate credit cards held by non-royal third parties. In one swift move, William did more than just balance the books. He effectively evicted the Queen's family from the financial sanctuary of the House of Windsor. Yet, as the prince tightened the financial noose, the shadows began to whisper back. It is a universal truth of power that for every audit, there is a confession. And for every ledger kept in secret, there is a ghost waiting to speak. The narrative now shifts from the flow of money to the man who knew exactly where the bodies were buried, Andrew Parker Bowles. The confession that landed on William's desk was enough to make the £14 million theft look like a mere footnote. What the Queen's former husband managed to record in just 6 minutes and 42 seconds was more explosive than anyone in the palace could have feared. While the trail of money led to high-security vaults, the true heart of this crisis was captured in a secret recording, far from the royal corridors of London. Within the secluded walls of a private villa in Wiltshire, a man who had kept his silence for decades finally decided to speak. Andrew Parker Bowles sat before a high-fidelity microphone for those critical 6 minutes and 42 seconds. This wasn't a desperate plea for attention or a draft for a memoir. It was a lethal insurance policy, a digital ghost designed to haunt Buckingham Palace forever. The recording begins with a heavy, weary sigh, the sound of a man surrendering a burden he could no longer carry. Andrew's voice, though weathered by age, possesses a piercing clarity as he delivers a blow to the very foundation of the modern crown. He states, and I quote, "The kingdom is resting on a delusion, and the private ledgers will show exactly who has been paying the price for this silence." He details a sophisticated web of offshore accounts and secret trusts, woven not out of convenience, but through 30 years of meticulous planning. He alleges that the Parker Bowles influence was never just about a marriage, it was a strategic infiltration of the royal treasury, a long-term operation to ensure his bloodline would never again face financial insecurity. This encrypted file reached the Prince of Wales's hands on the afternoon of March 9, 2026. William didn't listen to it in his official office or with his advisors. He took the file to his private study at Adelaide Cottage, locked the door, and played those 6 minutes and 42 seconds on a loop. The atmospheric weight of that moment cannot be ignored. The future king was listening to the man at the epicenter of the palace's most scandalous era confirm his darkest suspicions. Andrew spoke of the Black Files documents detailing how the Queen allegedly used her influence to shield a network of private interests stretching from the UK to the tax havens of the Caribbean. According to this confession, the £14 million found in the audit was merely the tip of a much darker iceberg. Andrew describes a system of ghost stipends, regular payments to individuals who don't exist on any official roster, funneling immense wealth into accounts in Zurich and the Cayman Islands. These funds were used to buy the silence of former staff and maintain a shadow court operating parallel to the official household. The recording transformed William's mission from a simple cleanup into a desperate moral crusade. It gave him the moral high ground and the burning resolve he needed. This was the definitive proof that the Parker Bowles presence in the palace was not a partnership, but a parasitic relationship draining the last of the public's trust. By the time the audio stopped for the final time, William realized that a polite conversation with his father would never suffice. The shadow sovereign had to emerge. He saw that the Queen Consort was not just a stepmother, but the guardian of a financial fortress that threatened to bankrupt his father's entire legacy. As the midnight of the old regime approached, William prepared to trigger the most brutal phase of his plan, the total financial deoxygenation of the Parker Bowles network. But the question that now hangs over the palace is chilling. How will the queen respond when she discovers her secrets have been betrayed to the future king by the father of her own children, and when forced to choose between his lifelong companion and the son who holds the undeniable truth? Which way will King Charles turn? The strategy deployed by the Prince of Wales to trigger this total financial blackout was as brilliant as it was devastating. Within the elite circles of the royal bank, it is being whispered about as the oxygen cut, a clinical, surgical operation designed to drain the vitality of a shadow empire without firing a shot or creating a public spectacle. To grasp the lethal precision of this move, we must look at the legal and digital triggers William activated in the pre-dawn hours of March 12th, avoiding the slow, cumbersome gears of the civil court system. The prince instead weaponized the very traditions that have shielded the monarchy for centuries. His primary tool was a high-level, rarely invoked clause buried deep within the Sovereign Grant Act. By legally reclassifying the use of public funds specifically for hiring private investigators to shadow his own children as a direct assault on royal security, William bypassed the need for a parliamentary vote. It was a masterstroke of constitutional chess, effectively labeling the Parker Bowles financial network not just as a burden, but as a hostile entity residing within the palace walls. Once this legal seal was set by the prince in his capacity as the manager of the Duchy of Cornwall, the barrier between the family's private greed and the public treasury was reinforced with cold iron. At exactly 8:18 a.m., an encrypted, high-priority mandate was dispatched to the senior executives at Coutts & Company. This wasn't a request for a meeting or a suggestion for a budget cut. It was an absolute directive from the man who now holds the keys to the kingdom's most valuable estates. The command demanded the immediate termination of all secondary account activities and the total revocation of remote access for 12 specific individuals. In an instant, the digital keys to the royal coffers were erased. The oxygen cut was executed in 4 distinct, merciless stages. First, the identification. For 36 months, William's legal team meticulously mapped Camilla's extensive family tree, flagging every relative who had been quietly receiving ancillary security stipends. Second, the transparency threshold. By slashing the audit requirement for personal expenses to a mere £500, William dragged every hidden luxury into the light. Suddenly, every designer suit, every private jet, and every high-end dinner was flagged as a potential misuse of the sovereign grant. Third, the blackout. As the digital commands hit the servers at Coutts, the platinum cards held by the Parker Bowles relatives simply died. Imagine the scenes of quiet horror at luxury boutiques and private clubs as these high-profile figures found their cards declined. Their ability to maintain the facade of royal grandeur vanishing in the time it takes to swipe a card. Fourth, the repossession. The Crown Estate issued formal notices of dissociation to 3 specific luxury estates. These individuals were given a strict 21-day deadline, secure private funding, or face immediate eviction. William's maneuver left the Parker Bowles family effectively insolvent within their own homes. He understood that without the public's money to pay for security, drivers, and estate managers, their influence would evaporate. They were being reduced from royal fixtures to private citizens holding nothing but hollow titles and empty bank accounts. His legal team even froze specialized insurance policies for their art and jewelry, ensuring that any attempt to liquidate royal-adjacent assets would trigger an immediate audit. As the financial walls closed in, the atmosphere in the Queen's camp shifted from stunned confusion to a burning, unbridled fury. They realized that William hadn't just won a minor skirmish over money, he had fundamentally rewritten the laws of royal survival. He had emerged as the shadow sovereign, a leader who didn't need a crown to wield the absolute power of the treasury. But as the Parker Bowleses faced the reality of their exile, A darker question began to echo through the halls of Clarence House. With the money gone, what is left to lose? If the Queen Consort is pushed to the edge of financial ruin, will she finally reach for the ultimate leverage? The clock is ticking toward a midnight deadline, and the shadow of the silver drive is growing longer. William has cut the oxygen, but he has also backed a cornered lioness into a very small room. What happens when the silence of the treasury is broken by the roar of a final, devastating secret? The world is about to find out. The response from the Queen's inner circle was nothing short of a volcanic eruption. As the digital blackout rippled through the Parker Bowles' accounts, the carefully maintained image of a united palace disintegrated. Within the yellow drawing room, a space usually reserved for the quiet elegance of international diplomacy, the air grew thick with a resentment that had been simmering for over 3 decades. Palace staff positioned in the corridors recall a sound that will likely be etched into royal history: the sharp, violent crack of a priceless George, the 4th porcelain cup as it was hurled against the parquet floor. Camilla had reportedly reached her breaking point. Witnesses describe her lashing out at the Prince of Wales, her voice echoing through the heavy mahogany doors as she branded him a heartless vigilante, a man pathologically obsessed with a past he cannot alter. In a moment of raw, unshielded venom, she reportedly shouted, "You are killing your father for the sake of a ghost." It was a staggering, vitriolic reference to the late Princess Diana, a clear admission that the wounds of the 1990s remain as open and painful as ever. While the Queen immediately summoned the elite attorney Sir Jonathan Sumption to hunt for a loophole in the Sovereign Grant Act, the effort was futile. William's maneuver wasn't just a legal challenge, it was a total blockade. Throughout the storm, William remained as unyielding as cold iron. He didn't engage in the theatrics, he didn't raise his voice. Instead, standing beneath a portrait of his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, he delivered the final, crushing blow to any hope of a truce. Looking his stepmother directly in the eye, he stated, with terrifying conviction, "I will not let my mother's legacy pay for your family's silence." With those words, the prince turned his back and walked away, leaving the Queen Consort in a state of visible, trembling shock. At that moment, the power dynamic of the British monarchy shifted forever. By 9:30 that evening, the theater of war moved to the king's private study at Highgrove, where the tragedy became deeply personal. King Charles was observed in a state of institutional paralysis, trapped between his role as a husband and his duty as a sovereign. He reportedly pleaded for mercy and family unity. But the prince was immovable. William simply gestured to the mountain of audit papers, the cold evidence of the £14,850,200, and told his father that the honor of the crown outweighed the comfort of a few private citizens. The king appeared frail, his face a mask of total exhaustion. He is now navigating a structural nightmare that no monarch in a century has been forced to endure. Our analysis of the current data suggests Charles is in an impossible position. To overrule his son is to risk a constitutional crisis, with his public approval hovering at a fragile 42% compared to William's dominant 68%. The public has clearly made its choice. They want a lean, modern, and transparent monarchy. By remaining silent, Charles has effectively allowed William to ascend as the shadow sovereign, the man who now dictates the destiny of the royal fortune, while his father still wears the crown. But as the clock ticked toward midnight, a dark variable emerged from the shadows of Clarence House. While most of London was still cloaked in darkness, a high-security operative was tracked, slipping away from the residence's side entrance at 4:30 this morning. Sources within the logistics firm have confirmed that the courier, carrying a specialized and fortified briefcase, was bound for a secure, climate-controlled legal vault in Zurich, Switzerland. Inside that case sits the fabled silver USB drive, a device now being whispered about as the kill switch for the Windsor legacy. This drive reportedly holds a cache of encrypted video footage and digital access keys to clandestine accounts in the Cayman Islands. These records could potentially tie the highest echelons of the palace to international tax havens. As the Queen Consort feels the walls of William's financial purge closing in, she appears ready to pull the trigger on a digital exposure that would rewrite history. The Prince of Wales may have seized the estates and severed the funding. But the question remains, has he truly stopped the clock? The palace is currently a powder keg. Is the drive a genuine piece of leverage, or the final, desperate gamble of a collapsing dynasty? The world is on edge as the countdown to a potential total exposure begins. What do you think is waiting in that Zurich vault? Share your theories in the comments. Because the truth is finally closing in on the crown. The silent conflict within the House of Windsor reached a devastating crossroads on the morning of Friday, March 13th. While William finalized the economic dismantling of the Parker Bowles network, the global spotlight shifted from London's banks to that secure bunker in Switzerland. The courier has reached his mark, placing the silver drive far beyond the immediate reach of the British crown. We are witnessing the moment where the oxygen cut meets the kill switch, and the very survival of the monarchy hangs in the balance. To grasp the gravity of what is now locked away in Zurich, we must look back at the black files mentioned in Andrew Parker Bowles' confession. Our investigators have traced encrypted data streams to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, a paper company that has existed for over 3 decades without selling a single product. According to metadata leaked from the National Audit Office's Legacy Alpha folder, this entity acted as the digital gateway for the Royal Shadow Ledger. The silver drive is believed to hold the decryption codes for this ledger, potentially proving that the uncovered £14 million was just the tip of a multi-decade wealth diversion. If you stand for the principle that no one, royal or otherwise, should be above the law when it comes to public funds, make sure to hit that like button right now. We are the only team tracking the digital traffic between London and Zurich in real time. Drop a comment with the word accountability if you believe the Prince of Wales must follow this trail to its bitter end, regardless of the consequences. A state of institutional paralysis has gripped the palace, as eviction notices are served to the Parker Bowles estates. The Prince of Wales remains secluded in the Sovereignty Suite, fully aware of the disaster scenario looming ahead. If Camilla feels her dignity and resources have been entirely stripped away, she may authorize the release of the Zurich files. This wouldn't just be a scandal, it would be a digital Armageddon. We are talking about private correspondence and video evidence that could link the throne to unauthorized lobbying and offshore sheltering. The mechanism of this counteroffensive is as simple as it is terrifying: a dead man's switch in a neutral country. If William doesn't retreat, or if he goes public with the full audit, those Zurich instructions could trigger an automatic leak to every global newsroom simultaneously. William is wielding the law, but Camilla is weaponizing the truth, or at least her devastating version of it, to hold the crown's image hostage. Caught in the center of this storm is King Charles, facing the most agonizing dilemma of his reign. Late last night, witnesses spotted the king wandering the private gardens alone, looking aged and weighed down by a choice no father should ever have to make. Backing his son means watching his wife's family collapse while risking his own secrets. Backing his wife means losing the respect of his heir and a public that overwhelmingly views William as a hero. While Charles remains the ceremonial head, the scepter of power has clearly passed. William has become the shadow sovereign, but he is a ruler staring directly down the barrel of a digital gun. We are at the final precipice. The clock is ticking toward a midnight deadline that will determine who controls the royal narrative for the next century. Is that silver drive the ultimate leverage? Or is it a hollow bluff? Tell us your theories below. We are monitoring every single comment as we prepare our final report on this historic day. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. The next update could be the one that changes everything you thought you knew about the House of Windsor. The world is holding its breath. As the dust settles on this unprecedented purge, we are witnessing a fundamental transformation of the British monarchy. In my view, Prince William isn't just acting out of a personal vendetta, he is making a high-stakes survival move. He clearly understands that in 2026, the crown cannot survive on tradition alone. It requires the moral consent of the taxpayer. By initiating the oxygen cut, he is signaling that the House of Windsor is no longer a private sanctuary for extended relatives, but a transparent institution held to the highest standards of accountability. The ultimate lesson here is simple yet profound. In the digital age, transparency is the only currency that truly matters. Shadows may offer temporary comfort, but they eventually become a lethal liability. For the monarchy, and perhaps for all of us, the cost of maintaining a secret is often far higher than the price of the truth. If this deep dive into the royal archives opened your eyes to the new reality of the House of Windsor, please like this video and share it with fellow royal watchers to keep the conversation going. Make sure to subscribe and turn on all notifications so you never miss a chapter of this unfolding history. Your support allows us to keep tracking the truth behind the palace gates. What is your take? Is William a visionary savior or a ruthless heir? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time. The screech of brakes tore through the morning air, followed by the shattering of glass and a rapid burst of distorted signals from police radios. In the heart of London, a place long accustomed to order and protocol, a rare scene of chaos unfolded. A luxury vehicle sped straight into an ancient roadside tree, and the name confirmed moments later left the entire nation in stunned silence. Queen Camilla. But what made this incident truly unsettling was not the impact itself. It was what began to emerge behind the shattered glass. This was not merely a traffic accident. It felt like the first shot, signaling a political earthquake, quietly shaking the very foundations of Buckingham Palace. The year 2026, a moment when all eyes were fixed on the fragile transfer of power between King Charles III and Prince William. A period in which even the slightest deviation could become the catalyst for a crisis. Rumors of financial pressure, undisclosed expenditures, and controversial decisions had been quietly building into an unexploded bomb. And then this accident occurred at the most sensitive possible time, too coincidental to be dismissed as chance. The question was no longer how the vehicle lost control. The real question was, who stood to benefit from this sudden silence? Was this merely an unfortunate accident, or a carefully calculated move designed to conceal a larger truth? Or perhaps even the final step of a woman who had long lived within power and was not prepared to let it go? If you believe this was only an accident, leave the number 1. If you sense that something is wrong beneath the surface, leave the number 2, because what is about to be revealed may force you to reconsider this entire story in a completely different way. The crash scene did not resemble any conventional traffic accident the public had seen before. The luxury vehicle lay at an angle, its front end severely deformed, as if struck by a direct high-speed impact. Yet strangely, there were no long skid marks on the road. Fragments of shattered glass were scattered farther than usual, forming an asymmetrical dispersion pattern that immediately raised questions among experts about the true direction of impact and the actual inertial force at the moment of the collision. An anonymous witness, who arrived at the scene just seconds after the crash, described hearing no prolonged braking sound, only a sudden noise, like a compressed explosion trapped within a confined space. The timing of the accident was another detail that observers could not ignore. 10:15 in the morning, exactly 3 hours after the vehicle had completed its routine safety inspection. According to leaked internal records, the car had been confirmed to be in perfect condition, with no technical faults, from the braking system to the engine and the electronic control unit. This meant that if a failure had occurred, it was either an extremely rare anomaly or the result of deliberate interference carried out within a very short window after the inspection was completed. 3 hours. Too brief for natural wear, yet long enough for a prepared plan to be executed. But the most shocking detail did not lie with the vehicle. It lay in Queen Camilla's own decision just before departure. According to sources within royal security, she had unilaterally cancelled her escort team, a protocol considered untouchable for any senior member of the royal family. No police lead vehicle, no trailing protection unit, no backup communication system, a decision that on the surface could be explained as a desire for privacy. But in the current context, it appeared more like the deliberate removal of her own final layer of protection. Why she did this remains a question without an official answer. Some sources suggest she wanted to avoid media attention during a personal trip. Others argue this was not an impulsive act, but a calculated choice. Because only without an escort would the vehicle's movements become harder to track, and if any interference were to occur, it would not be immediately detected by the usual multiple layers of security. The deeper investigators looked into the scene, the more anomalies surfaced. Traffic camera systems in the area suddenly malfunctioned during the exact window of the incident. Not the entire network, but only specific nodes that had direct angles on the route the vehicle was traveling. A random technical failure, or a selective intervention. Technicians called in urgently declined to provide immediate conclusions. Yet their silence only fueled further suspicion. Even the first medical team on site offered observations that complicated the narrative. They confirmed that Queen Camilla's condition did not fully correspond with the extent of the vehicle's damage. She was injured, but not critically, as many had feared. A small detail, yet enough to raise the possibility that the collision may not have occurred in the way it appeared. Perhaps the speed was not as high as the scene suggested, or perhaps the angle of impact had been altered in some way. While the public struggled to piece together fragmented clues from the crash site, inside Buckingham Palace, a completely different atmosphere prevailed. There was no panic, no emotional reaction. Instead, there was calculated silence. Closed-door meetings took place continuously. Doors remained tightly shut, and above all, there was a growing sense that something far greater was being concealed beneath the surface of what was presented as an accident. But Camilla did not expect that while she lay in a hospital bed with a fragile expression in an office across the corridor, a pair of cold, watchful eyes had already seen through every crack. If the crash site remained shrouded in unanswered questions, inside Buckingham Palace, an entirely different approach had quietly been activated. Prince William did not choose the path of an official investigation, and according to many close sources, this decision was not impulsive. It was the result of a cold assessment that traditional investigative channels, influenced by long-standing advisors, might no longer be as neutral as they appeared, especially when the name Camilla stood at the center of every suspicion. For years, Queen Camilla had built an extensive network of relationships, not only within political circles, but also deeply embedded within the royal administrative system. Her loyalists did not seek attention, did not appear in the media, yet held positions significant enough to control the flow of information. And William understood this better than anyone. He knew that if the case went through official channels, sensitive traces could be blurred, or worse, erased entirely before they were ever recorded. As a result, a parallel investigative structure was established, a small group operating outside all conventional procedures, referred to internally by a name heavy with implication: the Shadow Unit. No official records, no public list, yet every member was a leading expert in their field. From cybersecurity to data analysis to legal finance, they did not stand in the light, but they followed the smallest traces others overlooked. Their first focus was not witness testimony, but the control system of the crashed vehicle, a technical decision that opened a critical turning point. Data from the central control unit, believed to have been damaged in the collision, was recovered using advanced methods, and it was here that a shocking detail emerged. 10 minutes before the vehicle struck the tree, the steering system recorded an abnormal signal from an unidentified external device. Not a software error, not a mechanical failure, but a form of external interference. According to preliminary analysis, this device had the capability to access the control system and send direct commands to the steering mechanism, which meant that during those brief moments, the vehicle may not have been entirely under the driver's control, a hypothesis that, if confirmed, would transform the entire incident from an accident into a deliberate act. But the immediate question was where that device came from, and more importantly, who had the capability to deploy such a sophisticated form of interference. The shadow unit continued to trace the technical trail, from connection signals to the source of transmission, and although no official conclusion had been announced, what they uncovered was enough to make the internal atmosphere more tense than ever before. At the same time as the technical investigation, another line of inquiry was launched. This time, the focus was not the vehicle, but the flow of money, because in any scheme, financial traces are always the hardest to conceal. And indeed, after only a few days of review, a figure emerged: £15 million, an unusually large sum, recorded as having disappeared from a trust fund linked to internal royal operations. There was no clear transfer order, no complete approval records, only a complex chain of transactions, dispersed across multiple intermediary accounts before vanishing entirely from conventional tracking systems, a pattern of movement that financial experts immediately recognized as indicative of deliberate concealment. And what made everything even more sensitive was the timing. The money disappeared just days before the accident occurred. Was this merely a coincidence, or part of a larger plan? A plan in which finance and technology were not separate elements, but two pieces supporting each other. If the external device was the tool, then the flow of money could be the trace of the one behind it. William, according to what has been revealed, did not react emotionally to these findings. He did not rush to make accusations. He did not allow his decisions to be driven by feeling. Instead, there was a chilling patience. He understood that in a confrontation with a seasoned figure like Camilla, every move had to be calculated with precision, because even the smallest mistake could cause the entire effort to collapse, allowing those behind it to erase every remaining trace in time. At the same time, he also understood that technical and financial evidence, while important, was not enough to deliver a decisive blow. They could be disputed. They could be interpreted in different ways. And in an environment where public image plays a crucial role, the truth does not only need to be proven, it needs to be heard. For that reason, a new approach began to take shape. No longer data, no longer numbers, but words, conversations, recordings, moments in which people, no matter how careful, might reveal their true nature. The technical evidence was already there, but to defeat a politically seasoned woman like Camilla, William needed a more powerful weapon, her own voice. What William now held was enough to shift the direction of any investigation, but he understood that in a world where everything could be denied, technical data and financial traces were still not the final strike. They needed something more vivid, more direct, a form of evidence that could not be distorted by argument or authority. And then, the opportunity came in a way no one could have anticipated. A bouquet of white roses. The bouquet was delivered to Queen Camilla's hospital room that same afternoon. Among dozens of floral arrangements and greeting cards from politicians, aristocrats, and close associates. There was nothing remarkable about its appearance. Pure white petals, perfectly trimmed, arranged in a classic style, a symbol of purity, of well wishes for peace. Yet that very perfection made it suspicious in the eyes of those monitoring every smallest detail. According to internal information, the bouquet had not gone through the standard security screening process, a rare oversight, or a deliberate arrangement, and that seemingly minor detail opened the door to a decisive turning point, because hidden deep within the carefully arranged stems and leaves was a miniature recording device. No light, no obvious signal, simply operating in silence, waiting. No one knows exactly who placed the device inside the bouquet. Some theories suggest it was part of the Shadow Unit's plan. Others believe it may have been the act of an individual within the system, someone who chose to break the silence in their own way. Whatever its origin, the result it produced was undeniable. The recording was captured during the period when Queen Camilla was believed to be resting after receiving medical care. But what it revealed stood in complete contrast to the image presented to the public. There was no sound of pain, no sign of weakness. Instead, there was a clear, firm voice, even carrying the familiar coldness of someone long accustomed to giving orders. In the recording, Camilla did not mention the accident. She did not ask about her condition. The first thing she spoke about was the blue files at the residence. Her voice was low, but each word was pronounced clearly. Without hesitation, she instructed the person on the other end to clear them immediately, leave no trace, ensure that nothing could be found, and more importantly, complete it before any official inspection could take place. The phrase blue files immediately became the center of analysis. What were they? Financial documents, personal records, or evidence directly linked to the £15 million that had disappeared? No one could say with certainty, but the fact that it was mentioned in this context, with such urgency and authority, was enough to make it an essential piece that could not be ignored. The person on the other end of the line was not identified, but their reaction was also recorded. A brief hesitation before agreeing to carry out the instruction. That alone suggested this was not the first time they had received such orders, and this was not a simple relationship. It was a structure that had existed long before, operating in the shadows, revealing itself only when necessary. When the recording was delivered to William, according to what has been disclosed, he did not speak a single word while listening. There was no immediate reaction, no visible display of emotion, only a prolonged silence, heavy enough to make everyone else in the room feel its weight, because they understood that what he was hearing was not just a recording, it was confirmation of suspicions he had carried quietly for a long time. But what made that moment truly striking was not only the content of the recording, it was the surrounding context. Just a few corridors away, King Charles was inside the chapel, praying in silence. A completely contrasting image, a father seeking peace and faith, while his son was confronting a truth that could shatter the entire family structure. The solitude William felt in that moment could not be denied. He could not share it immediately. He could not walk into the chapel and speak of what he had just heard, because he knew that every word spoken now could become a deeper wound to someone already exhausted. Yet at the same time, he could not turn away from the truth. He could not pretend that everything was still fine while the evidence was becoming clearer with each passing moment. That was a dilemma no book could ever teach someone how to face. Between duty to the nation and family bonds, between reason and emotion, and in this case, every path came with a price. The recording was then analyzed repeatedly. Every sound, every pause, every subtle shift in tone was dissected. Experts confirmed there were no signs of editing, no technical interference. It was an intact recording, and it was precisely that integrity that made it the most dangerous piece of evidence. Because unlike data or numbers, a voice carries the person within it. It does not only convey information, It reveals will, attitude, and intent. And in this case, what that voice revealed was not the panic of a victim. It was the control of someone still orchestrating everything. Even while lying in a hospital bed, when all the pieces were placed together, a clearer picture began to emerge. The accident was no longer an isolated event. It was part of a connected chain of actions, from the decision to cancel the escort, to the interference with the steering system, to the missing flow of money. And now the instruction to clear the files. Each element could be explained on its own, but when combined, they told a completely different story. A story in which power was not maintained only through titles, but through the ability to control information. A story in which the truth did not simply surface, but had to be pulled out of the shadows through effort and risk. And now, as all the cards were gradually laid face up, William stood before a choice no one would wish for. He could continue to remain silent, preserving the outward stability of the monarchy, at the cost of burying the truth. Or he could move forward, bring everything into the light, and accept the unavoidable consequences. All the cards were on the table. Now, William had only one final move left, the most painful one: to face his exhausted father. The room at Windsor Castle chosen for the meeting was not a place where royal ceremonies were usually held. It was discreet, far from crowded corridors, ensuring that whatever took place inside would not be exposed before the right moment. Yet that very stillness made the atmosphere heavier than ever, because this was no longer an ordinary internal meeting. This was a confrontation whose outcome could reshape the entire power structure of the British monarchy. King Charles entered first. His steps were slower than usual, his shoulders slightly lowered, as if the weight of recent days had begun to show in every movement. His eyes no longer carried their familiar composure, but a fatigue he could not conceal. He knew this meeting was unavoidable, yet perhaps, somewhere deep inside, he still hoped things would not be so severe as to require such a direct confrontation. William arrived after. There were no extended greetings, no customary pleasantries. He stepped in with near absolute focus, holding a thin folder and a small device. His face showed no emotion. Yet that very calmness made it clear to anyone present that this was not a consultative discussion. This was a decision already prepared. Camilla was the last to appear. She was no longer in the hospital room, but had been brought to Windsor under the pretext of recovering in a quieter environment. On the surface, she maintained her familiar composure, proper attire, measured gestures. But those who observed closely could sense a tension beneath, because she understood that if William had called for a meeting like this, he had not come empty-handed. The confrontation began without any prolonged introduction. William placed the recording device on the table. No explanation, no detour, just a simple action, yet enough to shift the atmosphere in the room instantly. Charles looked at the device for several seconds, as if trying to anticipate what was about to happen. Camilla remained silent, but a flicker of caution passed through her eyes. When the recording was played, no one spoke. The voice in the recording filled the enclosed space with clarity. Every sentence, every word, every pause laid bare. There was no longer the shield of public image, no media control, only the raw nature of what had been said in a moment when the speaker believed no one was listening. At first, Charles maintained his posture. He listened with intense focus, like a man searching for a detail that could deny what he was hearing. But as it continued, a change began to emerge. His gaze no longer remained fixed. It shifted, from surprise to confusion, from confusion to something harder to define. And when the commands about clearing the files were repeated, his eyes stopped at a distant point, as if he had just realized a truth he could not deny. It was the moment Meni would later describe as a silent collapse. There was no shouting, no dramatic reaction, only a change in his gaze, from belief to doubt. and then from doubt to something close to revulsion, not because the content of the recording was too shocking, but because it came from the person he had chosen to stand beside through years of turmoil. Camilla, throughout that entire time, did not interrupt. She did not attempt to explain immediately. No denial, no reaction. A silence that could be interpreted in many ways. Acceptance, calculation, or simply waiting for the right moment to respond. Yet that very silence made everything clearer in the eyes of those present. William did not need to say much. He did not make direct accusations. He did not use harsh language. He simply allowed the recording to speak for itself, and in an environment where every word could be disputed. Letting the truth speak on its own became the most effective strategy. After the recording ended, the room fell into a prolonged silence. Charles did not look at anyone for several seconds. He lowered his head, both hands resting on the table, as if trying to steady himself in a reality that had just shifted. When he finally looked up, his eyes were different. No hesitation. No searching for justification. Only a decision that needed to be made. The order was not officially announced. No document was released to the public. But internally, the message was delivered with absolute clarity. Queen Camilla would be stripped of all access to financial resources connected to royal operations. All of her internal communication channels would be monitored, and, more importantly, she would be moved to an isolated location under the pretext of recovery. This was not a form of public punishment. There was no humiliation before the media, no trial, yet that silence carried decisive weight. Because in the world of royalty, being removed from the flow of power can be more severe than any sentence declared in public. Many later asked the question, why not bring everything into the light? Why not make it clear before the public? The answer, according to many analyses, lies in the fragile balance between truth and stability. A shock too great could not only destroy an individual, but bring down an entire system, and at that moment, Charles's choice, though controversial, was the only way to preserve what remained. William left the room without turning back. He did not celebrate. He did not show victory, because he understood that this was not a triumph. It was a price paid to protect what he believed was right. But at the same time, it was a wound that could never be erased within his own family. The castle doors closed. An era ended in silence. Yet the fractures it left behind could never truly be healed. Ladies and gentlemen, the shockwave that began with what seemed like a random collision has ended with a quiet but profound transformation within the heart of the monarchy. What we have witnessed is not only the fall of an individual, but the shift of an entire structure of power built over decades, and within that space, a new image is emerging more clearly than ever before. The rise of Prince William and Princess Kate. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady enough to become the anchor of an institution under strain, while King Charles remains caught in internal conflict between duty and personal emotion. William has chosen the more difficult path, cold, decisive, and at times ruthless. Yet that decisiveness is exactly what the monarchy needs at a time when public trust is being tested. And Kate, with her composure and flawless image, continues to serve as a symbol of stability. No controversial statements, no reaction to turbulence. Yet every appearance is a quiet affirmation that the monarchy still has a future. In the end, this story is not only about power, it is about the cost of power. The crown is not only a symbol of glory, but a burden of integrity, because at the top, every decision carries consequences. Every mistake leaves a mark. And sometimes, the price to be paid is not only reputation, but relationships that can never be repaired. So between a heartbroken King Charles and a cold, decisive Prince William, who leaves the deeper impression on you? And what do you think about the price Camilla has paid in this entire story? If you want to continue exploring the untold sides of the British royal family, do not forget to like and subscribe. For years, the world heard a prince speak of a future without fear, a vision of a monarchy that embraced meaningful change without losing its soul. But for King Charles, the reality of the crown has proven far more turbulent than anyone imagined. After a lifetime of waiting in the wings, his reign is already being pushed to its absolute breaking point. A fresh wave of controversy has struck the House of Windsor, and this time, Queen Camilla is caught right in the crosshairs, faced with an impossible situation. The king is now being forced to do the unthinkable, stepping back and surrendering his final authority to his son, Prince William. But what is the true story behind this sudden shift in power? And what does it mean for the future of the British Empire? Let's dive into the details. King Charles has always been acutely aware that the British crown carries a heavy, often invisible cost. When the devastating news of his cancer diagnosis was made public in February 2024, the palace immediately went into high gear. Their mission was clear: reassure a worried public that the monarch remained committed to his constitutional duties. Charles himself was adamant about staying visible. He knew all too well that a king who disappears from the public eye invites a dangerous sense of uncertainty, and uncertainty is the one thing the House of Windsor works tirelessly to prevent. From that moment on, the challenge was twofold. It wasn't just a medical battle, it was a high-stakes performance to maintain the image of a functioning king during a time of extreme personal fragility. Charles returned to his duties with surprising speed, hosting guests at Windsor Castle and appearing at key engagements. But behind the scenes, the palace was micromanaging every second of his day. His workload was carefully curated, selecting appearances that carried symbolic weight but demanded little physical strain. To the casual observer, he looked calm and composed. But those watching closely began to notice a shift in the very texture of his daily life. The once restless energy that defined him was fading. The ease with which he used to breeze through a full day of royal duties was gone, replaced by a slower, more deliberate pace, a silent reflection of the battle his body was fighting. As his treatment stretched through 2024 and well into 2025, the palace updates became a masterclass in cautious optimism. They spoke of progress but skipped the details, always careful not to fuel the fires of speculation. When he returned to Windsor after further medical attention, it was framed as ongoing care rather than a setback. Yet, the fact that the treatment was still active more than a year later told a story of its own. Cancer at this level, over such a long duration, leaves a mark that no royal protocol can hide. But the king's health wasn't the only crisis demanding his attention. In October 2025, Charles was forced to make one of the most painful decisions of his life: the formal removal of his brother, Prince Andrew, from royal duties and his home at Royal Lodge. This wasn't a snap judgment. Andrew was his younger brother, and despite the public's outcry over his associations, the private reality of evicting a sibling was agonizing for Charles. He had spent years trying to manage the situation with minimal noise, hoping the controversy would eventually die down. But by late 2025, it was clear that it wouldn't. The cost of doing nothing had finally become too high for the monarchy to bear. The release of new prize, more damaging Epstein files in 2025 had turned the tide. Andrew's name was everywhere, tied to details that could no longer be explained away or ignored. Charles realized that every day Andrew remained in a royal residence was a day the palace's credibility was being eroded. It was the right move for the institution. But the personal toll on Charles was visible to everyone around him in the weeks that followed. By the end of the year, his public Christmas message carried a tone of deep gratitude, even as he acknowledged his ongoing treatment. As the calendar turned to 2026, the palace confirmed the king's treatment was entering a different phase. While presented as encouraging, the language remained hauntingly cautious. There was no mention of full remission, and no promise of a return to a full schedule. The palace was being honest about the limits of what they could guarantee, and that honesty itself spoke volumes about the seriousness of the situation. What makes this period so difficult to process is the tragic timing. Having ascended the throne in 2022 at the age of 73, Charles had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. He had decades' worth of visions for architecture, the environment, organic farming, and the future of the Commonwealth ideas he finally had the power to implement. He had barely begun to make his mark when the diagnosis arrived. By early 2026, those close to him described a king who was still engaged and thoughtful, but carrying a tiredness that went far beyond the physical. He was still performing his role with dignity, but the restless fire of his past had settled into a quiet resignation. He was a man coming to terms with the widening gap between the reign he had planned for 70 years and the reality that was now possible. For his family, watching that gap grow was perhaps the hardest part of all. The seismic shift in Prince William's role over the past few years didn't arrive with a grand announcement or a formal ceremony. Instead, it unfolded through a quiet, steady accumulation of power, a gradual expansion into territories that had, for decades, been the exclusive domain of his father. By the summer of 2025, those who study the intricate mechanics of royal life began to notice a definitive pattern. William's diary was no longer that of a supporting heir. His schedule had expanded significantly, placing him at the center of events with a scale and geopolitical weight that suggested something far deeper than a son simply helping an unwell parent. It was clear the institution had made a strategic choice, and William was being positioned as the new face of the monarchy. Perhaps the most undeniable evidence of this transition came in November 2025. While the world gathered in Brazil for COP30, the premier international climate summit, it was William who represented the United Kingdom on the global stage. For decades, King Charles had been the world's most prominent royal champion for the environment. Yet at this crucial summit, his absence was conspicuous. William didn't just fill a seat, he engaged with a level of confidence and substance that signaled a new era. He was no longer a substitute, he was the primary royal voice on the world's most pressing issue, and the international community accepted him as such. Back at home, the changes were just as profound, though far less visible to the public eye. Behind the closed doors of the palace, William's household began receiving access to high-level briefings and consultations that had once been reserved solely for the king's office. While the official explanation was continuity planning, ensuring the heir was ready just in case the reality went far beyond a mere contingency plan. It reflected an institution that was actively, and in real time, building William's authority. He wasn't just preparing for a future role, he was already inhabiting it. The ongoing crisis surrounding Prince Andrew gave William his first real opportunity to demonstrate the kind of decisive leadership the palace so desperately needed. As the pressure on King Charles to act became a tidal wave, William was anything but passive. Behind the scenes, he was the primary driver for a firm and swift resolution. He understood that how the palace handled Andrew wouldn't just affect a family member, it would define public trust in the monarchy for decades. His willingness to take a hard line on a painful family matter proved to the old guard that he was ready to make the impossible choices required of a king. By this period, William's relationship with the palace's senior advisors had matured into something entirely new. He was no longer a pupil being guided through complex decisions, he had become the one doing the guiding. Strategic questions about the crown's future, its public image, and its long-term survival were now being decided with William at the head of the table. These were conversations that would have been unthinkable just 2 years prior. The institution had placed its bet on where its future lay, and it was moving toward that future with calculated precision. This growing authority was further bolstered by Catherine's return to her royal duties. Her presence alongside William gave their partnership a renewed sense of stability and completeness. It wasn't just one man taking on more work, it was a united front, building a new legacy together. Catherine's focus on early childhood development gave her role a level of substance and intellectual weight that transcended traditional ceremonial appearances, impressing everyone within the palace's inner circle. However, this shift also created a new and delicate dynamic with Queen Camilla. As the center of gravity moved toward William's household, Camilla increasingly found herself on the periphery of key strategic discussions. In the subtle culture of the palace, being left out of the room is the clearest signal of where real power resides. While her exclusion wasn't absolute, it was consistent enough to be noticed by those in the know. It was a silent but meaningful indicator that the institutional heart of the monarchy had moved on. As we stand today, William has not yet been crowned, and no formal proclamation has been made. King Charles remains the sovereign, performing the duties his health permits with grace and dignity. But within the walls of the palace, the operational reality is undeniable. The major decisions, the responses to scandals, and the roadmap for the years ahead are now being shaped primarily by William. Charles is respected, he is informed, and his wisdom is still sought, but the forward momentum of the British monarchy now belongs to his son. The transition is already here. All that remains is the world's formal acknowledgement. For decades, Camilla had been meticulously rebuilding her life within the heart of the British royal family. It was a journey defined by endurance and a quiet, patient resilience. When she married Charles in April 2005, she didn't just join a family. She faced a wall of public hostility that many believed would never crumble. Yet, she managed that bitterness with a steady, unseeking consistency, performing her duties without fanfare and allowing time to achieve what no argument ever could. By the time Charles finally ascended the throne, her position seemed ironclad. Even the debate surrounding her title as queen during the coronation had eventually faded, leaving her as a stable, accepted presence beside the king. But the shadow of the Jeffrey Epstein scandal has proven to be a storm that no amount of royal protocol can fully suppress. For years, Prince Andrew's ties to Epstein had been a source of unrelenting crisis, leading to the 2022 settlement with Virginia Giuffre and his painful, gradual erasure from public life. King Charles's eventual decision to strip Andrew of his royal associations and demand he vacate Royal Lodge was seen as the palace's most definitive line in the sand, a necessary sacrifice to protect the monarchy's reputation. For a fleeting moment, it seemed the institution had finally distanced itself from the damage. That sense of resolution was shattered in 2025. A fresh wave of documentation resurfaced, shifting the spotlight toward the social networks that surrounded Epstein's world. Among the names appearing with renewed frequency was Sarah Ferguson. While Sarah had previously apologized for her financial connections to Epstein, these new files placed her in a much broader, more damaging social context. The media coverage was substantial and immediate, and it brought an old friendship back into a very dangerous light. The bond between Sarah Ferguson and Queen Camilla was never a secret. It was a genuine, if unlikely, connection forged over years of navigating the complex orbits of royal life. In any other era, this friendship would have been a trivial detail, but in the toxic atmosphere of the new Epstein revelations, it became a liability the palace could no longer ignore. Prince William made his position chillingly clear. The continued public visibility of this friendship was a risk the monarchy simply could not afford to carry. The message delivered to Camilla was direct and uncompromising. The relationship with Sarah Ferguson had to end, or at the very least, vanish from public view. While this was framed as an institutional necessity rather than a personal attack, the impact was no less severe. Camilla, a veteran of decades of palace politics, understood the gravity of the request. She knew that the institution's tolerance has very real limits, and those limits can shift with terrifying speed when the right pressure is applied. In the weeks that followed, Camilla chose a path of absolute silence. She didn't distance herself publicly. But she didn't defend the bond either. She simply went mute. While her official schedule continued with its usual reliability, her silence on the Sarah Ferguson question did not go unnoticed. In a modern media landscape where silence is often interpreted as confirmation, the story only grew. The absence of a formal clarification allowed speculation to fester, exactly as the palace had feared. The scrutiny Camilla now faced was fundamentally different from the hostility of the past. This wasn't about her history with Charles, it was a politically charged, reputational crisis. Even columnists who had championed her for years began to adopt a more cautious, questioning tone. Social media amplified the criticism faster than any official response could manage, and the carefully crafted image of Camilla as a stable, uncontroversial figure beside the king began to show visible, undeniable cracks. For King Charles, this unfolding drama was profoundly agonizing. He had spent the better part of his life fighting for Camilla's acceptance and securing her place within the institution. To see her position becoming an institutional risk, at the very moment his own failing health limited his ability to protect her, was a source of deep distress. Palace aides tried to shield him from the most brutal conversations. But Charles was no stranger to the cold reality of royal dynamics. He understood all too well that if this atmosphere wasn't checked, it would solidify into a permanent shadow over his reign. The power was shifting, and the stakes had never been higher. Historically, the British monarchy has navigated its internal shifts under a cloak of absolute silence. Survival, for this ancient institution, has always relied on a unique ability to evolve without ever appearing to be in crisis, to change its entire trajectory without ever admitting a change was necessary. The transformations that began behind the walls of Buckingham Palace late last year, and which have only accelerated into the present, follow this exact, calculated pattern. No formal proclamations were made, and no grand announcements were issued. Yet, the adjustments to the palace's daily operations have been both consistent and undeniable, and they point in one single, unmistakable direction. The first cracks in the old order appeared in the way official communications were structured. Substantive matters that were once destined solely for King Charles's desk began routinely flowing through Prince William's office as well. On the surface, the palace justified this as continuity, planning a practical measure to keep the heir informed while the king managed the heavy demands of his health. While continuity is a legitimate and vital function of the crown, the sheer scope and regularity of the intelligence being shared with William's team began to exceed what a simple contingency plan would ever require. Inside the palace, those in the know understood exactly what this meant. The information was no longer just being shared, the authority was being shifted. Even the royal diary, the very heartbeat of the monarchy's public life, began to reflect this new reality. Events and high-stakes engagements that would have once been arranged around Charles's schedule as a matter of course were now being presented first to William's household for consideration. In many instances, William's team stepped in to lead engagements that Charles would have taken in years past. In others, while the king still attended, William was briefed in such exhaustive detail beforehand that he was, for all intents and purposes, a co-sovereign. This gradual rebalancing of the royal calendar has placed William at the center of the crown's public identity more frequently than ever before. Publicly, the palace paints this as a son supporting a father internally. It is the architecture of a new reign being built in real time. Perhaps even more significant is the evolving relationship between William's household and the key departments of the British government. In a constitutional monarchy, the bond between the sovereign and Westminster is built on a foundation of constant, high-level communication. The fact that William's team has established direct, substantive lines of dialogue with government offices, Lines that were previously the exclusive territory of the king is a structural shift that did not happen by chance. It required deliberate institutional intent. The groundwork for a functioning reign was being laid long before any formal notice reached the public. Throughout this entire process, King Charles has remained fully informed. Those managing this delicate transition have been meticulous in ensuring that nothing happens without his awareness. The goal was never to sideline the king or diminish his immense dignity, rather. It was a move of preservation, protecting him from the crushing weight of daily governance so he could conserve his energy for his health, while ensuring the monarchy itself did not stall or become directionless during a period of profound uncertainty. The two worlds, the reigning king and the acting heir, now coexist in a fragile but necessary balance, managed with the utmost respect. However, this new structure has created a particularly delicate situation for Queen Camilla. As William's household has moved into the operational center of the monarchy, Camilla's access to the inner sanctum of strategic decision-making has begun to quietly diminish. She continues to perform her public duties with her usual grace, maintaining her titles and her schedule. But the circle where the crown's most vital future-shaping decisions are made has narrowed. It is a circle that now revolves around William and his advisors, and Camilla is increasingly finding herself on the outside looking in. In the hypersensitive culture of the palace, these signals are read with crystal clarity. A pivotal internal meeting in late January, involving the king and his most senior advisors, seems to have been the tipping diem. While the details of that room remain private, the actions that followed spoke volumes. William's team was granted formal access to materials that previously required special requests, and his operational structure was upgraded to reflect a permanent senior role. By February, a dual structure of authority had been firmly established. Charles remains the king, the ceremonial heart, who still engages in decisions requiring his direct hand. But William has taken the wheel of the forward-facing institution, managing the strategy, the key relationships, and the palace's response to modern challenges. They operate in parallel, not in competition, with every effort made to shield the king's legacy. But the truth is clear to everyone behind the scenes: the operational heart of the British monarchy has moved, and the formalization of that movement is now only a matter of time. The British monarchy is an institution that leaves absolutely nothing to the hands of fate. Deep within the fortified walls of Buckingham Palace, dedicated teams of officials have spent years refining every intricate detail of what must happen the moment a reigning sovereign passes. These plans are never static, they are updated regularly, adjusted to the shifting tides of the era, and kept in a state of constant readiness. The ultimate goal remains singular: to ensure the royal vessel moves forward without a single second of chaos, without delay, and without showing any sign of instability to the watching world. The strength of the crown has always rested on its ability to absorb massive change while projecting a facade of absolute permanence. When that inevitable moment arrives, the circle of communication will operate with clinical precision. Those closest to the king will be the first to know. The royal family will be informed immediately, followed within mere minutes by the Prime Minister. Only after these core pillars of power have been connected will the news be shared with the rest of humanity. At the gates of Buckingham Palace, a simple, black-edged notice will be posted, a deeply symbolic act that has marked the passing of British monarchs for centuries. Across the nation, flags will be lowered to half-mast, and the rhythm of British life will abruptly shift into a period of national mourning and reflection. William will become king the very instant Charles draws his final breath. There is no waiting period, no required ceremony, and no formal vote. Under British law, the crown transfers automatically, passing from one sovereign to the next in the space of a single heartbeat. However, the coronation is an entirely different matter. It is a massive, months-long operation involving thousands of participants, intricate logistics, and ancient ceremonial traditions. History shows us the scale of this wait. Charles himself waited 8 months after his mother's passing to be crowned. William would almost certainly face a similar, if not longer, timeline to prepare for a ceremony of such magnitude. In the days that follow, the king's body will be moved to Westminster Hall, where the public will be invited to pay their final respects as he lies in state. The scenes following Queen Elizabeth's passing in September 2022 demonstrated just how powerful this moment truly is. Hundreds of thousands of people stood in lines stretching for miles along the Thames, waiting for hours in the cold just to walk past her coffin and bow their heads in silence. A similar wave of public emotion will undoubtedly surround Charles, creating a final, physical bond between the nation and its king before the formal burial rites begin. The palace's internal roadmap for Charles's end is known by a specific operational code, Operation Meni Bridge. The name is a tribute to the famous suspension bridge in Wales, reflecting Charles's 60-year tenure as the Prince of Wales before he took the throne. Planning under this mantle began in earnest immediately following Queen Elizabeth's funeral, as the palace used the lessons from that monumental operation to sharpen and perfect the preparations for what comes next. Once the king is laid to rest and the period of national mourning concludes, all eyes will turn toward William's coronation. This ceremony will formalize his kingship before the world and the church. Even though he will have already been serving as king in every legal sense since the moment of his father's death, history suggests the weight of this preparation is immense. Queen Elizabeth II waited 16 months after the death of King George VI before her coronation in June 1953. An event of that scale requires perfection in every detail, and William's team will need every moment of that time to execute it. As of now, there is no indication that Charles is unable to fulfill his duties despite his ongoing cancer treatment. He continues to meet with the Prime Minister and maintain a steady schedule of engagements. However, should his condition take a significant turn for the worse, British law has a formal mechanism ready to handle the crisis without requiring an abdication. The Regency Act of 1937 allows royal authority to be transferred to the heir when a monarch becomes incapacitated. Under this arrangement, William would take on the full responsibilities and powers of the crown as Prince Regent, long before he officially holds the title of king. As we watch these historic shifts unfold, it becomes clear that the British monarchy is currently facing one of its most profound tests in modern history. From my perspective, this transition is about more than just a change in titles. It is a poignant reminder of the constant tension between human fragility and institutional duty. King Charles spent a lifetime preparing for a reign that is now being defined by his quiet resilience in the face of illness and the cold, hard necessity of protecting the crown's reputation at any cost. The ultimate lesson we can all draw from this royal saga is the power of legacy and the necessity of adaptability. Even the most ancient institutions must evolve to survive. Whether it is Prince William's increasingly decisive leadership or the palace's meticulous execution of Operation Meni Bridge, the message is clear. The path forward requires immense courage and a commitment to something much larger than oneself. But what are your thoughts? Do you believe Prince William is truly ready to take the helm? Or should the king hold on to his final authority for as long as possible? Drop your views in the comments below. I'd love to hear your take on this power shift. If you found this deep dive into the drama and duty of the House of Windsor insightful, please give us a like and share this video with your friends. Most importantly, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to join our community and stay updated on the latest royal developments. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. At precisely 10:42 on a brisk London morning, a subtle but profound shift rippled through the historic halls of Westminster Abbey. The atmosphere within the great cathedral felt far from routine. It was electric, not with the spirit of celebration, but with the heavy, unmistakable weight of a pivotal transition that had been quietly gathering momentum for years. As Catherine, Princess of Wales, stepped from her vehicle onto the stone path leading to the entrance, the public saw exactly what they expected, the epitome of poise and grace. Photographers captured the Navy ensemble, the meticulously crafted hat, and that serene smile that has become a hallmark of her royal service. To the casual observer, she was the familiar, modern face of the monarchy. However, in the nuanced world of palace observation, a much different narrative was being written. The senior courtiers watching her arrival weren't interested in fashion, they were deciphering signals. Within the House of Windsor, every movement is a calculated message, and nothing occurs by chance. On this Commonwealth Day, Catherine wasn't merely attending a service, she was manifesting a role that had evolved from a symbolic figurehead into a far more formidable power. While the world believed this was just another pageantry-filled gathering, the institution itself was aware of a seismic shift occurring behind palace walls. For weeks, a series of discreet legal maneuvers, archival audits, and strategic realignments had been quietly reshaping the control of the Crown's most sensitive private holdings. The vast estates once personally held by the late Queen Elizabeth II were no longer in a state of transition. Instead, authority over these assets was being firmly consolidated into the hands of the future king. Standing shoulder to shoulder with Prince William, Catherine's presence carried a newly found gravity. It wasn't a loud or theatrical change, but it was undeniably firmer. It is the kind of quiet authority that doesn't need to demand attention, yet completely alters the energy of a room the moment she enters it. Seated on the opposite side of the aisle was Queen Camilla. To the untrained eye, it was business as usual, two of the monarchy's most senior women fulfilling their national duties. However, in the meticulously orchestrated realm of royal etiquette, it is often the most minute gestures that mask the grandest truths. In this world, power, proximity, and hierarchy are not broadcast through speeches, they are whispered through the subtle geometry of distance and the unspoken language of a greeting. On this particular morning, that familiar dance did not go according to the script. As Camilla moved to greet Catherine in the customary fashion, something occurred a moment so fleeting that a casual viewer would have missed it entirely. Yet, for those within the inner sanctum, the message was deafening. An invisible line had been drawn in the sand. The interaction happened with such lightning speed that its true weight remained hidden from the public. To the outside world, it looked like nothing more than a polite exchange between family members. But within the rigid architecture of royal protocol, even a hair's breadth of deviation can signal a seismic shift in status. For decades, the standard greeting among senior royals at formal events had been a predictable ritual, a warm inclination, a brief air kiss, and a visual display of solidarity for the cameras. It was a tradition as old as the ceremonies themselves. But that morning, the tradition hit an abrupt wall. As Camilla leaned in, the Princess of Wales remained stationary. Instead of closing the gap, the broad, structured brim of Catherine's hat acted as a physical barricade. Perfectly angled, her designer headpiece created a literal no-fly zone, making the customary closeness impossible. For a split second, Camilla faltered, caught off guard, and forced to pivot into a much colder, more distant response. What remained was nothing more than a sterile exchange of pleasantries, a tight, controlled smile, and a formal nod. The warmth had vanished, replaced by a calculated and unmistakable perimeter. While the public might have overlooked the exchange, the reaction among palace staff, security detail, and seasoned insiders was instantaneous. One observer recounted a sharp, collective intake of breath from the Queen's own entourage stationed near the north entrance. The gravity of the moment was undeniable in the world of the Windsors. Access is currency, and proximity is the ultimate sign of trust. A single greeting can expose the inner workings of the royal hierarchy more effectively than any polished press release. On this particular morning, Catherine didn't just maintain her distance, she manifested it. This wasn't an awkward stumble or a defensive reflex, it was a deliberate statement. Experts who decode royal behavior know that spontaneity is a rare guest at high-profile events. Every step, every nod, and every glance is meticulously vetted by private secretaries and protocol maestros to ensure no message is sent by mistake. This is exactly why several palace insiders later whispered that this wasn't a fashion choice or a lapse in etiquette, it was an ordained strategy. According to a high-ranking palace source, Catherine had been briefed to establish what was internally referred to as a controlled perimeter. Though the term sounds cold and clinical, its implication within the palace walls is crystal clear. The doors to the inner sanctum of the future monarchy are swinging shut. The era of easy familiarity is over. And a new, more exclusive guard is being mounted. The timing of this icy shift was far from coincidental. In the quiet weeks leading up to the Commonwealth service, a silent revolution had been taking place within royal legal offices and private archive rooms. Strategic decisions were being finalized that would fundamentally reorder who holds the keys to the crown's most prestigious and symbolically potent assets. At the center of this storm was Prince William, who had just officially assumed control over these high-stakes holdings. At the heart of the crown's power lie the complex blueprints of its survival, intricate trust structures, ancient agreements, and legal mandates that dictate exactly who commands the monarchy's most precious lands. When Queen Elizabeth II passed away, these documents were suddenly transformed from historical records into high-stakes battlegrounds. You see, the transition from one monarch to the next is far more than just a series of public ceremonies. It triggers a massive, invisible administrative machine. Behind closed doors, private estates and personal trusts must be meticulously audited. And for months, Princess Anne has been the silent architect of this transition. Insiders at Windsor reveal that the Princess Royal spearheaded what archivists called a heritage verification review, a grueling, forensic deep dive into the late Queen's personal portfolio. Her mission was simple yet vital: to revalidate the legal standing and succession paths for every single estate linked to Elizabeth's name. While many assets were already governed by the well-known duchy system, a secondary, more mysterious tier of property existed, lands that Elizabeth had specifically shielded from commercial exploitation or political interference through layered legal protections. It was during one of these late-night archival sessions that Anne unearthed a document that had long escaped notice, a supplemental legal appendix buried within a trust arrangement from the Queen's final years. Its implications were explosive. This document clarified that several of Elizabeth's most secluded and private retreats were to be classified not as standard family assets, but as sovereign heritage properties. This classification changed the rules of the game entirely. It stipulated that administrative authority over these lands was to bypass marital ties or extended family influence. Instead, it was reserved exclusively for the direct bloodline of succession. The wording was razor-sharp and left no room for interpretation. For Anne, the discovery was a masterstroke. It meant that the moment Prince William was confirmed as the operational heir, absolute stewardship of these protected lands would fall to him and him alone. There would be no shared oversight and no secondary advisory boards, just one ultimate, unchallenged authority.